to run their performance for us. Now, I don't exactly know what to expect from this, so I'm going to let the two of them introduce their wonderful selves to us and then get cracking. So everybody, please put your hands together for the wonderful Jane Walde and Mark Turner. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Rose, I think you got the slides for us for the session. Excellent. Thank you very much. So welcome to your future, this as a strategic advisor. It's been very interesting today in that we've talked about how digitisation is really going to help us move forward in terms of risk management. But the things that Mark and I really wanted to focus on were the very human skills that risk managers need to develop and hone to future-proof their careers. I'm Jane Walde. And I think there might be a slide, sorry. There we are. Here I am. I'm Jane Walde. I'm a qualified accountant. I've been working in enterprise risk management across many sectors now for about 15 years. And I love helping organisations and people. So I'm also a holistic life coach.
Hello, everybody. So my name is Mark Turner. I think lots of you probably know me, certainly in the UK, from the Innovation SIG. I was previously the chair, and I've also been the secretary of the SIG for a number of years. So hopefully some of you recognise me. I'm a technologist and an engineer by trade. I've been working in the defence and aerospace industry for about 30 years. And over that time, I migrated into audit and risk management. I currently run my own risk management software design and training consultancy. And I am a certified fellow at the Institute of Risk Management. And just like Jane, I'm also a qualified life coach.
So what are we going to look at in this session? What we're going to do is we're going to explore how leaders lead so that we understand the process and that we can more readily tune into that mindset.
So for some risk managers, talking to the C-suite can be a little bit like talking to somebody from a different planet. So one of the things we want to do is explore and examine the human ways to bridge those communication gaps. And it just goes back to what Mike was saying there about keeping it simple and being a communicator. At the same time, we recognize that communication should be monitored both up and down through an organization. And we'll touch on that a little bit.
Now, you might already be seen as a strategic advisor in your organisation, but in lots of surveys that come back from risk managers, we're told that actually in the strategy setting process is an area where we're quite challenged to fully engage. So we're going to look at how we might reposition to be seen more as strategic advisors.
And then we're going to wrap up with sharing you what we believe to be the essential human skills that are still required in a world that's going a bit mad for digitisation, and provide you some insights into the things that only humans can still do at this time.
So let's start with taking a look at the risk versus leadership mindset. So how do leaders actually lead? Well, they use their imagination to create something in the future, and then they set strategies and objectives to make sure that this future story becomes a reality. So in effect, they're rather like storytellers. Now, that means that their mindset is creative, it's hopeful, and it's focused on success. Now, all too often, the risk manager comes in once the vision and the strategy have all been created with a list of reasons why the plan might fail.
And this is where being stuck in a risk register and highlighting the negative risks is a real big turn-off for leaders. Yeah. So Jane and I both believe that we need risk managers to stop saying things like, this is a problem and here's why it's a problem, and start saying things like, we can achieve this vision if we take these particular actions. Now, listening to what was said this morning, Greg took that a little bit further, and he suggested that risk leaders actually should be maximising an organisation's value beyond the delivery of their immediate projects as well. And this is by being strategically directing their companies to achieve opportunities. So Jane and I are now going to do a little communication style role play where Jane's going to take on the role of the CEO and I'm going to take on the role of a risk manager to see how maybe it shouldn't be done.
I've just been to this excellent workshop by the IRM. They're talking about digitising risk management as the way of the future. Now, I thought you were all about the future, but this risk report you've given me is already out of date. Why can't we have real-time risk analysis and reporting like we do in our operations and manufacturing environments?
Well, digitisation of manufacturing operations has been achieved by measuring physical equipment and counting outputs. What you need to understand is that there is one fundamental problem when you ask me about risk management.
Oh yes, and what's that?
Digitisation measures real-world things that are occurring in real time or that occurred in the past. And risk is what could happen in the possible future. Once it occurs, it is no longer a risk, it is a reality. My reports say what might happen in the future, given the information available to me at the time, and so that it is not intended to be a real-time reporting. I cannot measure the future because the data for it does not exist.
You're being pedantic. What I want to know is what's going to go wrong before it goes wrong so I can do something about it.
Now, this introduces the risk management paradox. If I say something will happen and you do something about it so that it doesn't happen, how do you measure my success in predicting the future? If I fail to tell you what might happen and it does occur, then you want to know why I didn't foresee it. As far as you are concerned, I only ever failed to predict what did go wrong. So how can I ever win?
Now you're being really pedantic. I want the risk department to use artificial intelligence to predict what opportunities are out there that are going to help us grow and to identify those things that might prevent us from growing.
How do you think digitisation is going to help us there?
Well, the IRM talked about using artificial intelligence to see patterns in data. It talked about using the Internet of Things to monitor control adherence. And that's what I want our risk function to be doing, analysing tons of real-time data and coming up with future credible scenarios that will stand up to rational scrutiny.
And where do you think we will get this data from? AI needs to be told where to look. And if it's looking in the wrong place, it will never see what's coming.
Well, can't we direct it to look at our controls and see what we're missing?
Monitoring controls and spotting where they fail is not preventing risks, but seeing where risks are not fully controlled. We can use that data, but it's a bit like locking the barn door after the horse has bolted, and it won't come up with the new controls. The criminals and errors, they occur in the places where we're not looking. And no AI is capable yet of thinking outside the box. So we need to define the box for it.
Okay, well, let's define a box. How about we get our people to report incidents and then we can look for patterns in that?
Now, that's also a post-incident approach. Yes, we can, and that will be easy for a large organisation, but we're only a medium-sized organisation. It'll take time to gather enough information to spot the meaning.
So what's the solution?
Maybe we should stop thinking about digitisation as a solution and start thinking about it as an enabler.
Can you give me some examples?
Let me think about it and I'll get back to you. More work to do.
Well, you can see how the CEO is not going to walk away from that conversation with a really good feeling about their risk management function. So let's look a bit more about leadership and vision and see how we can really get into this. So we've established that it takes vision and imagination to lead effectively. And then leaders develop a narrative or story from this about the future success of the company. And that vision becomes a reality through setting objectives that will turn that story into a reality. And of course, that story will actually be realised in the future.
Now, of course, this might sound really obvious, but in business as well as in life, it's necessary to take action in order to achieve something. And when we take action, we will introduce change into a situation. And all change is likely to be risky. And by that, I mean there is an uncertainty around the outcome of the event. And it may be a very positive outcome, or it could be a very negative outcome. But either way, the investment you make in the action will have a consequence which may either be intentional or unintentional.
Now, the success of the company hinges on a credible and convincing narrative about the future state of the business, because this is what investors and employees buy into.
So once leaders have created the story, it still needs to be communicated to the people in such a way that they can believe in it. And in order for it to become fruition, otherwise it will just remain a story in people's minds. So the skill is in making people believe in the story that lies not only in the story, but the storyteller and all of those who are required to retell it. And this is where strong interpersonal skills, which are human skills, are required to match the story to the mood of the listeners and perhaps adapt it on the fly to ensure the audience is fully receptive to it.
And the risk manager's role is to make sure that the story is known, to help people understand how the objectives will deliver the story, and to ensure that the story is credible. So risk managers should be looking to present themselves as the compelling storyteller on how it can be done, given the foreseeable obstacles. So how do we go about that? Well, first of all, obviously, we start with context, as always. So we use the context to build the credibility of the future story, but also use the context to challenge that story where it's weak. When the risk assessment is firmly based on context in relation to objectives, it's going to be a relevant discussion for your leadership team, and it's a neutral basis for discussion. Now, as many of the other speakers have referred to today, we need to understand that we work in extended enterprises, because no business is ever in isolation. And that extended enterprise consists of customers, suppliers, competitors, regulators, as well as the internal dynamics of the people. And they'll have their own belief systems, political views, biases, and human weaknesses and strengths. So all of this connectedness creates a really complex system. And change in a complex system cannot be predicted, as there are so many emergent properties which we just can't guess at by looking at those just component parts.
So it's necessary to remember that a lot of what has been decided by every leader is based on imperfect information. It will have all sorts of limitations and will be constrained by all sorts of internal and external expectations from such things as politics or economics, and also the physical limitations of the world. We find that assumptions, dependencies, exclusions, and constraints can create a complex environment which nobody will ever be able to perfectly understand. Also, whatever we think we know will eventually change, because as we all know, change is the only true constant in the universe. So the vision needs to be adaptable, and the leaders need to see change coming. But we must not forget that the act of observation of a system can also have the effect of changing it as well.
So really, we're saying that the risk manager should act as the realist to ensure that the leader's vision remains grounded and in touch with the reality of the world, whilst also remembering that leadership vision manifests the potential future states. And so risk management can be seen as the hindrance of this manifestation, or conversely, it can be seen as the facilitator of the vision. So we've got another little scene to just demonstrate how this could play out. I'm the CEO and Mark's the risk manager again. Here we go. I've just been to an excellent IRM event about the digitisation of risk management. I think we could use some of those ideas to improve our performance.
That's a good idea, boss. What areas were you thinking about specifically?
Well, I know our manufacturing facility is monitoring output performance and using key performance indicators for delivery. Can we set up KPIs for risk?
The trouble with KPIs is that they're a backwards looking metric. What we need to be thinking about are KRIs, the key risk indicators. These are metrics about things which have not happened yet, but can start to indicate where problems may be starting to occur, and perhaps more importantly, where opportunities may lie.
Ooh, perhaps we could have key opportunity indicators. I like that, and so would our investors. Can we use digitisation to tell us where to look for opportunities?
But not to start with, humans would need to identify some areas in order to identify what data to gather. We then use the digitisation to help us gather the data But from there, we would need to train an AI on the sample data so that it can begin to know what patterns to look out for.
How could that work?
Well, I like the 3 horizons approach, which breaks the future into what is happening now, what could result from what is happening now in the near term, and what could happen in the far term. Now, 2 of these 3 horizons, I think, are ripe for digitisation. They are capturing the data now and the short-term future. So we can look at trends in the existing data and then use the AI to help forecast how that might develop.
But what about that 3rd horizon? How can we predict what might happen in the more distant future?
Well, I think, like in the words of the film The Terminator, the future is not set. There is no fate but that we make for ourselves. And in that respect, I would like to think that rather than trying to forecast what may happen to us, we should try to predict what we can make the future look like. After we've considered what we want, we should assess our areas of exposure to help develop our resilience plans. I think only by using our imaginations can we begin to create our own future and then use all of these tools at our disposal to make it come to pass.
Well, that conversation felt a bit more positive. So we're going to look now at how risk managers can reposition themselves to be seen more as strategic advisors. So first of all, understand and attune with the future story of the organisation. Have you actually really engaged with what it is? Because this is where the leadership's energy is really focused. So when you've tuned into this, help your leadership look for additional opportunities. But also, obviously, we're not going to completely ignore the downside. We're going to help establish that credible and sustainable corporate story with a realistic focus on success.
Now, risk managers should be a key communication conduit for every organisation. Communication should be both up and down the levels of the organisation. But sometimes they've got a tendency to be misinterpreted and misunderstood. And this reminds me of the old adage, which was called the plan. And I'd like to read it for you now. So in the beginning, there was a plan, and then came the assumptions, and the assumptions were without form, and the plan without substance. And in the darkness was upon the face of the workers, and they spoke amongst themselves, saying, "It is a crock of shit, and it stinks." And the workers went out into their supervisors and said, "It is a pile of dung, and we cannot live with the smell." And the supervisors went unto their managers, saying, "It is a container of excrement, and it is very strong, such that none may abide by it." Then the managers went unto their directors, saying, "It is a vessel of fertilizer, and none may abide by its strength." The directors spoke among themselves, saying to one another, "It contains that which aids plant growth, and it is very strong." The directors then went to the vice president, saying unto them, "It promotes growth, and it is very powerful." And the vice president went to the president, saying unto him, "The new plan will actively promote the growth and vigor of the company with very powerful effects." And the president looked upon the plan and saw that it was good, and the plan became policy. And that, my friends, is how shit happens. Now, I believe personally, as a big part of being a risk manager, is to keep our ears to the ground and ensure that communication is being interpreted correctly in all directions. This requires challenging the interpretations with diplomacy and sensitivity to the audience, whilst also keeping an eye on the actual objectives and not necessarily the interpretations of the way the objectives are being achieved.
So yes, it's too easy for us as risk managers to focus too much on our risk registers and just fall into the trap of presenting lists of why objectives may not be achieved.
So this is where our human skills are needed to think about what it is that we can do to help our leaders achieve their strategic visions. Can we use our people, our relationships across the extended enterprise, and the other resources which are available to us, which a computer simply cannot see and just doesn't understand or know about, in order to help our leaders to achieve the story that they've originally sold to us?
So at the end of the day, much of what we've talked about has one key element in common. They're all innately human skills, which at this time, at least, we don't think computers are going to readily replicate. And so here are the essential skills that Mark and I think risk managers need to develop and hone to sort of future-proof our success. So first of all, avoid asking closed questions. So never ask a question that results in an answer that is yes or no. Instead, ask open questions, because this will make people open up about the things they want to tell you, and that will give you much better quality information. We've all heard of active listening, but a particularly useful one here, particularly with leaders, is actually repeating the story back. So once they've told you, assuming that you've asked them to tell you their future vision for the company and where the company is going, repeat it back to them. This does a few things. Leaders love hearing their own ideas repeated back to them because it helps them build confidence and credibility in them. But it also helps them spot weaknesses and perhaps where to adjust those plans. But perhaps more importantly, it allows you to check that you've fully understood what leadership has in mind, because we're obviously that essential communicator within the organisation. So we better make sure that the story we're communicating out to the rest of the organisation is the right story.
So influencing skills are key in this, and this should include non-verbal cues, including tone of voice and confident body language, in order to deliver a convincing narrative. And we also know that workshops can be highly effective to both capturing data and to deliver the desired messages. So developing facilitation skills is a really important thing risk managers can do. Now, these soft skills are commonly described as being emotional intelligence, or EQ. But unlike your IQ, which is fixed, your EQ can be developed and trained so that you can build mindfulness leadership skills and approaches to facilitate change within your organization. And also make sure that the actions of your risk management function are in support of the wider corporate strategy and objectives. Your planning should be aligned to ensure sufficient focus and resources are targeted at the corporate objectives.
And also be really aware about the stories that you're telling yourself about your future. Now, far too often we let our own inner critic run rampant and undermine us. So listen carefully to what your inner critic is telling you and begin to take charge of that story, because it will help build your personal resilience. And then once you've had a think about where you want to go in the future, start building your own future vision and then build your own personal strategy from that. So in developing and honing these human and personal skills, it's not only going to future-proof our careers, but it's also going to make us happier and healthier people.
So to conclude, we believe that the risk professional will survive in the face of digitisation, provided that the risk professionals focus on their essential human skills.
And if you'd like any further help, advice or training on any of the points we've raised, Mark and I would be really happy to help you.
Thank you.
Fantastic. So I think everybody, please put your hands together, not just for the performance, but the phenomenal wisdom and advice that has just been given to us by the wonderful Jane and Mark. So thank you so much for that. Genius. And especially Mark, because we know that you've been pretty ill over the last week or so. So he's up and he's delivered. That was a brilliant performance. Thank you, sir.